Hello, I'd like to comment briefly on an issue that I think every politician should address, and I think an issue that politicians should address with a little more nuance than we are now. Over the last few years, as others have noted, we seem to have switched roles with the Democrats becoming a party of hawks, particularly as it relates to Russia, and perhaps because of grievances they hold against Russia for um, actions in the past few years that actually may or may not have had any impact whatsoever on American elections. And then also the issue with respect to Ukraine today and the degree to which there is any resistance to supporting Ukraine with an open book, open checkbook. That comes from the right typically. And so I'd like to address the overall issue of the American military and where we might go from here. So just to make a few points real quick, I'd like to suggest that the United States military, properly purposed and financed, does have a place, an important place, but it ought to be, as with any nation, a primarily defensive posture. The degree to which we have come to expect the U.S. to swoop in and make things right anywhere wrong is found in the world, I think is a delusion that America has fostered over the last several decades. And I think it's something that not only are we now suffering from, but the world at large is suffering from. So I'd like to support a couple of, or present a couple of ideas in support of that comment, and then present some ideas that I think ought to be taken by our political establishment in order to bring things full circle, so to speak, with a military that is in fact properly purposed and financed. So as we look at what the U.S. has been doing, I'd like to say that there are some mistaken mission priorities that have taken root in how we view the military and what we do. Uh, and so we've been using the military to perpetuate liberal ideals such as democracy and freedom. But that's actually an oxymoron. The problem I think that we often face is failing to recognize the history behind America's position, or at least up till recently anyway, historic position of the democratic institutions represented a republic, technically in a national sense, that defines America, or by which America has been defined. And so the issue is that as these ideals have been born out over centuries, if not millennia, of debate, discussion, war, conflict, etc., the thing that we seem to forget is that you cannot force democracy, you cannot force freedom on anybody. If it isn't a matter of the people coming to understand and appreciate those ideals as a people, there's perhaps little opportunity for those ideals to actually be represented in their truest sense. And so the degree to which we've used the military to perpetuate or to attempt to perpetuate these liberal ideals, we've misrepresented those ideals. Over the last 60 plus years, the United States has defaulted to a position that any government or foreign action deemed not in accord with U.S. military, governmental, or business interests justifies the use of military and secret operations personnel. The more that information is released about the CIA and other covert operations, the more we see actions such as what is taking place in Ukraine today, where the U.S. provides military weaponry, at least so far, not military personnel, although, or at least not extensive military personnel. I believe there may have recently been some installed for training quote purposes. But the degree to which the U.S. has defaulted to interjecting itself militarily around the world in the name of preserving or perpetuating freedom, et cetera, I think we need to seriously stop and consider our priorities. I'm not arguing against democracy. I'm not arguing against freedom. I'm not arguing against a representative republic form of governance such as the U.S. has. But I am suggesting that unless people are in a place whereby they can understand and apply those principles themselves, the U.S. effort to force those principles has perhaps done more harm than good, particularly in the last 30 to 40 years. So the idea, if you look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, even other places around the world where the U.S. has tried to force changes to a people whose fundamental understanding of the nature of reality and their place in the world is different from what the liberal idealism of the U.S. has purported to represent. It simply hasn't worked. The degree to which Ukraine was presented just less than 2 decades ago as the most corrupt government in Europe and is now being presented as the bastion of liberal democracy against Russia's imperialist objectives should cause us to step back and ask why or how did this transition take place. And so I think we need to really reflect on the use of the military and how that use is justified, how that use is in fact called for with respect to the president having the power to send in troops, the president and Congress having the power, the authority to send in troops and or approve the use of military machinery, equipment, etc. All of that just needs to be reviewed. And then finally, the power of the military-industrial complex must be curbed, stop its self-justifying actions that cost trillions of dollars and the death and displacement of millions of lives. I'd suggest that it's no accident that this activity in Ukraine has depleted, according to some estimates and reports, U.S. military stockpiles or stockpiles of equipment and ammunition, munitions for U.S. military equipment around the world and in the U.S. in particular. That this expenditure of resources in Ukraine has perhaps compromised the U.S.'s position with respect to simply executing a defensive strategy should another empire in the world seek to invade the U.S., namely China. And of course, one of the issues that I would suggest that we are facing here is in this context, whether the U.S. has missed an opportunity over the last 50 to 60 years to facilitate in a more democratic, in a more just way, the transmission of these principles of democracy and freedom on the world stage in the name of short-term expediency by using the military such that the ideals that we are purporting to support and represent have been compromised both on the world stage in the eyes of other people around the world and in the eyes of many Americans today. So what would I suggest as a solution? Namely, a military political plank for any party, anybody that purports to represent the U.S. interest and affect the direction of U.S. policy in general. Well, first, begin annual budget reductions of at least 5%. The U.S. Grossly overspends on military compared to the rest of the world, both in absolute dollar value and as a percentage of budget, and we need to reduce that overall expenditure. Require biannual audits with subsequent budgets cut by the amount of unaccounted funding. As I understand it, the military, the Pentagon, just failed its fifth audit by billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. It's not clear to me why we would continue to fund a program that is unable to account for the money that has been given to it. Conduct an immediate review of preparedness for a defensive-only posture. The degree to which, quote, defensive weapons are used in ostensibly offensive manner, that we need to review our preparations, our plans for military activity, and focus on a defensive rather than an offensive posture. Evacuate U.S. military personnel from bases around the world based on a policy of non-interventionism. We have more bases by far than any other country at different places around the world that are not U.S. territories themselves. And we need to evaluate why we have that and the degree to which having them, in fact, fosters and antagonizes those who potentially will become, if they aren't already, America's enemies, and how a different posture towards other nations might, in fact, facilitate a more um, productive relationship with other peoples. Return evacuated military property to the nation on which they stand. The degree to which we have these properties, either through treaties or through purchase or whatever the arrangement is, that we actually have structures that are being controlled by America in the regions that we have no business being, we need to evacuate. Utilize other resources for non-military activity. We seem to have, in many places, the U.S. military involved in trying to build schools or build roads or do other things in the name of presenting a good face with respect to the military to the other peoples. Uh, Go in and blow up a place and then use the military to rebuild the roads, et cetera, et cetera. We need to use the military for what the military is for. I believe it was General Powell who said the military or the army, you may have said particularly, but the military essentially kills people and breaks things, and utilize other resources, governmental, preferably not, preferably non-governmental agencies and institutions, to rebuild locations once the areas have been secured for justified military intervention. And then finally, review Veterans Affairs and similar programs to ensure that the best possible care is being given to veterans with the funds available. The degree to which the military budget reflects spending on VA and other programs that are designed to aid our veterans, and the degree to which those programs continue to receive suboptimal failing grades, we need to, in conjunction with reducing the overall budget, we need to insist on a program or a set of programs that actually result in providing the services that our veterans need. So I appreciate your time and thinking through these things. I did ramble on a little more than I intended. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. But as one who believes in America and the idea that America was founded on principles that are worth living by and worth sharing with the rest of the world, I think we ought to reconsider how, in fact, how in the world we are going about sharing and perpetuating those ideals. Thank you all very much. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those. And as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye bye.